How you doing, everybody? Welcome to Wilde's Mailbox here at, I don't know, what's the website? ESPN something. It's been a long night. I'm going to try and answer some questions, but I'm a little bit tired. Actually, I'm fine. We're getting plenty of sleep. Things are going extremely well. As you can see, Madison, out like a light again. Paula just saw my hair this morning and decided that it would be a good idea to share it with the entire viewing public. So here we are doing Wilde's Mailbox here at ESPNMilwaukee.com and ESPNMadison.com with me looking like Yahoo Serious. Got 3 different emails that I want to get to today. The first one comes from Brian, and actually Brian and Kevin both have similar questions. Kevin asks, do you ever see John Dorsey wanting a GM position? And Brian asks, with John Schneider and Mark Schiefelbein having left the front office, are there any other moves you see in either the front office or the coaching staff that will trump Schneider leaving, and is Reggie McKenzie the next office staffer to leave? I think that they're pretty much set now in terms of what the moves are going to be. There were a couple of minor moves on the coaching staff. No one was dismissed. They flip-flopped Mark Lavatt into the coordinator of strength and conditioning, and Dave Redding, who is a longtime veteran of the NFL, is now his assistant. It was kind of a mentoring situation last year, so Mark could get prepared to get that gig. But generally speaking, there haven't been any moves on the coaching staff. In terms of the front office, I think John Dorsey and Reggie McKenzie are both quality candidates to be general managers at some point. Reggie McKenzie has been interviewed twice for such a job, but it hasn't happened for him. I talked to John Dorsey in Arizona before the regular season finale because I've gotten a lot of emails about him, and he says right now he is very happy in his current gig. Now, that doesn't mean that at some point he may not pursue a general manager position. Who knows if things continue to go the way they do and the Packers continue to have success under Ted Thompson. He could be a guy that could someday take over for him. I know for people who were ready to fire Ted Thompson when the Packers were 4-4 and lost to Tampa Bay, which had been winless, it was a little bit hard to imagine anybody following Ted Thompson in a progression because they figured he'd be fired shortly. But I think both those guys are valid candidates. I wasn't surprised when John Schneider got his job. But for now, the Packers are going to stand pat in their front office. They feel like they have enough guys to get everything done. They were a little bit top-heavy before John left. But if they were to lose one of those other 2 top lieutenants, I think that would really make things challenging for them. We go to another email, and this one comes from Lou Dobbs, protecting our borders from a farm in northern Wisconsin. I think that's what Bill Johnson says. He wants to know, long story short here, if I caught the twittering back and forth between Nick Barnett and Ryan Grant and Trey Wingo from ESPN about the idea of Sean Merriman coming to Green Bay. And I did see some of that. I don't know if you folks are on Twitter, but if you are, you can check that out. You have to follow Nick Barnett and a few other people to do that. But as Nick Barnett said, he'd like to have the Packers get Aaron Campman back first, and then if somehow they managed to also add Sean Merriman, he'd be thrilled. I think that's one of those pipe dream type things, kind of like Bill Johnson thinking that the Packers are going to trade up to take Sue with the #1 overall pick. But I would say this. I thought it was interesting that both Nick Barnett said that he would like to see Aaron Campman come back, and Ted Thompson has now said a couple times from the Pro Bowl or from the Senior Bowl that he intended to offer a contract to Aaron Campman and to bring him back because they believe he can have success in a 3-4 scheme, even though he was a little bit inconsistent in that scheme this year. So I don't think we're going to see Sean Merriman in a Packers uniform, and as Nick Barnett even pointed out on Twitter, if they did, he'd have to change his number because Nick Barnett's not going to give up number 56. Our final question comes from Patrick, and I've been putting Patrick off all season on this question because it's fairly long and involved, but since Madison's asleep, we can get to it. There's been a lot of chatter about the collective bargaining agreement. The word lockout is getting thrown around, and something about a player not becoming unrestricted until after being in the league for 6 years. What about this uncapped year? I've never gotten a good explanation of any of this. Have you ever seen the movie Philadelphia? One of my favorite movies, by the way. Denzel Washington uses the phrase, "explain it to me like I'm a 4-year-old." So, Jason, for all the fans lost on this mumbo jumbo, can you explain it to us like we're a 4-year-old? I can. In fact, I will. The NFL Players Association and the owners came to an agreement several years ago on a collective bargaining agreement. That's an agreement between the Players Association and ownership on basically the rules of the road for the NFL. And the NFL owners chose last year to opt out of their current agreement. There was a window of opportunity for them to opt out of the agreement and have it end after the 2010 season. Now, the reason they did that is they wanted a smaller percentage of their revenues to go to the players. Right now, about 60% of their revenue goes to player salaries, and they felt that was too high. They felt so strongly about that that they're willing to risk what I like to call killing the golden goose by having potential labor unrest, which is something the NFL has not had since 1987 when they used the scab players, if you recall. So what we're looking at here is a situation where the owners have now opted out, and so that triggered a different set of rules for the 2010 season. Those rules, there's a couple of interesting ones involved here. One is that there is no salary cap. So because of that, teams can spend as much as they'd like on their players. There is no limitation. I think this year it was 125, 130 million. There's no such thing now. So there's no floor or ceiling in terms of how much you can spend and how much you don't have to spend. So some teams could go, Pittsburgh Pirates, Florida Marlins here, and hardly spend anything on player salaries. Now, the other issue with 2010, because it's an uncapped year, free agency changes. And whereas players under the old system had been eligible for unrestricted free agency after 4 years of NFL service, now those players are not unrestricted. They are restricted free agents, as if in the old system they only had 3 years of experience. So what happens is players with 4 or 5 years of NFL experience that would have been unrestricted free agents are now restricted. And under the restricted rules, what that means is that not only do their current teams have a right to match any offer they receive if they give them a tender, but the teams that sign those restricted free agents are required then to give up draft picks for signing those players if their current team does not match that offer. So to go back into 4-year-old mode, let's take, for example, a guy like Nick Collins, who has basically been hosed by the system now twice. Although he did make $3 million last year because of escalators, he signed a 5-year deal coming out of college, which means that he wasn't an unrestricted free agent last year. He was still under contract. When you recall, he complained about his contract, skipped OTAs, etc. Now this year, when he would have been an unrestricted free agent after the season, under the old rules, if they don't have something new in place by March 1st, which is pretty clear it's not going to happen, he will still be just a restricted free agent. What the Packers will do most likely is put the highest tender on him, and that means that he's guaranteed the highest salary for 1 year from the restricted free agent tenders. And if a team were to try and sign him and the Packers chose not to match that offer, that team would have to give the Packers their first-round pick and their third-round pick to take Nick Collins from them. So it basically limits Nick Collins' chances of going to another team, because that's an awfully steep price to pay, in addition to the money you'd be paying him with a new contract offer. So players hate being restricted free agents. They want the opportunity to shop themselves to the highest bidder without any encumbrances upon them. And the Packers have a bunch of different guys who have become restricted instead of unrestricted free agents. 212 players within the league who would have been unrestricted free agents are now restricted instead. So it really changes the ballgame for them. Whereas for players with 6 or more years of experience, like Mark Tauscher, like Chad Clifton, like Aaron Campman, those guys will be free agents completely. The first guy on the list for the Packers among that group, now that Brandon Schiller's been signed, that they want to get done is Ryan Pickett.